It started on the second day of our stay. The neighbor's house, which had always seemed so full of life and activity, stood eerily silent. No one came or went. The lights remained off. And yet, we were sure we had seen people there the night before. My family and I had rented a secluded beach house for the summer. It was a beautiful place, tucked away in a quiet corner of the coastline. It's a kind of spot where you could hear the waves crash against the shore, and the only sounds you'd hear for miles were the seagulls overhead. The beach house itself was charming rustic wood, wide windows, and a large deck that looked out over the ocean. From the moment we arrived, everything felt like it was going to be perfect. But there was something strange about the house next door. It was an old beach house too, but it was much closer to the cliffs. The place was well maintained, but there was no sign of life. No cars in the driveway, no sounds of children playing, no one on the porch. It struck me as odd, especially since we could see the house so clearly from our deck. At first, I chalked it up to the owners being out of town, or maybe they had a private life that didn't involve the constant bustle of visitors. But on the second day, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to walk over there and introduce myself, perhaps even ask if they needed help with anything. My wife and kids stayed behind, enjoying the sun and the ocean breeze. When I reached the house, the front door was ajar. I knocked lightly, thinking it was strange that no one had answered earlier. After a few moments, I stepped inside, calling out, "Hello?" Nothing. The silence was unnerving, but I didn't think much of it. What? Maybe they were out, or perhaps they were just hard of hearing. But something about the house felt ... off. It wasn't dirty or abandoned, but it wasn't lived in either. The air was thick with dust, as though no one had disturbed it for months. I made my way around the house, peering into rooms. But every single one was bare, save for the occasional old piece of furniture. No personal belongings, no signs of life. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck rise as I turned to leave. Just before I stepped back outside, I noticed something strange in the living room. A family portrait hanging crookedly on the wall. The faces of the people were faded, their smiles frozen in time. I squinted, trying to make out the faces, but a chill ran down my spine when I realized they weren't familiar. I'd never seen these people before, but somehow I felt I should know them. I hurried back to the beach house, my heart pounding. As I walked in, my wife looked up from the kitchen. "How was it?" she asked. "There, you're not home," I said, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. The house was empty, just ... strange. She said, her voice uncertain. "I think I saw a light on there earlier, though." I looked out the window toward their house, but the lights were off again. No movement. It was as if the house had gone back to sleep. The following days became a blur. We tried to visit the neighbors a few more times, but each time the house was abandoned. The door would be slightly ajar, yet no one was inside. The feeling of isolation in that place grew stronger, and it seemed like we were being drawn into a strange, twisted game. One night after dinner, my wife and I were sitting on the deck when I saw something moving near the house next door. A figure stepped into the light from an upstairs window. It was quick, like a shadow slipping behind the curtains. I thought I saw a face, but it vanished as soon as I blinked. The next day, we went over again, and to my surprise, the door was locked. The windows were shut, and there were no signs of life whatsoever. I knocked on the door, but no answer came. It felt as if the house was mocking us, inviting us in only to show us nothing. I felt like I was losing my mind. By the end of the week, the strange events only increased. I woke up in the middle of the night, hearing soft voices whispering in the wind. I couldn't make out the words, but it felt as if they were calling to me. I didn't tell my wife, but I began to fear the house next door. One evening, while sitting alone in the living room, I noticed something terrifying. I could hear the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from the neighbor's house, faint, almost imperceptible, but clear enough to make me stand up. I rushed to the window and looked, but once again the house was completely dark. I couldn't take it any longer. I decided to investigate one last time. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way toward the house. The air grew colder as I walked, the hairs on my arms standing up. As I reached the door, I could hear breathing soft, but distinct, coming from inside. I pushed the door open, my heart racing. But the house was empty, not a single soul. And yet, the smell of perfume lingered in the air. It was sweet, almost suffocating. As I stepped further inside, I noticed something chilling, a fresh footprint, small and delicate, leading toward the back door. I followed the trail, only to find the back door wide open. There in the moonlight, I saw them, dozens of footprints in the sand, leading toward the cliffs. I ran, calling out, but there was no response, just the waves crashing in the distance. When I turned around to head back, I saw something that made my blood run cold. At the window, in the same spot where I had seen the shadow, there was a figure. A woman, her face pale and hollow, staring directly at me, our lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. My breath caught in my throat as the figure vanished, leaving only the echo of her gaze. I never saw the neighbors again. When we left the beach house the next day, their house was as empty as it had always been. But the memory of that face, the cold, unblinking stare, still haunts me. To this day, I wonder if they were ever really there at all. And if they were, ... where did they go? It was a quiet night. It's a kind of silence that wraps around you like a thick blanket, making every sound stand out. But there was something about the footsteps I heard on the beach that night. They were too deliberate, too slow. And when I went outside to check, there was no one there. I had rented the beach house for a week, wanting a quiet escape from the noise of everyday life. It was an isolated property, nestled near a small town, with only the sound of the waves crashing against the shore for company. I've arrived late in the afternoon, the sun just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the ocean. The house itself was charming, though it felt older than I expected. The kind of place with creaky floorboards and a musty scent lingering in the corners. It had character, but there was something about it, something off. I couldn't quite place it, but I shrugged it off. After all, it was just a house. That first evening, I spent hours walking along the shore, watching the tide roll in and out. The beach was empty, just me and the endless stretch of sand. As the sky darkened, I made my way back to the house, ready to unwind for the night. But that's when it started. The footsteps. At first I thought it was the wind, or perhaps some animal wandering across the sand. But the sound was too rhythmic, too purposeful to be either. It was the unmistakable sound of human footsteps, slow and deliberate, like someone was walking along the beach in the dark. I stood still, listening. The footsteps were coming from the direction of the shore, from the water's edge. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I told myself it was nothing. Probably some other person out for a midnight stroll, a local perhaps. But something told me that wasn't the case. I grabbed a flashlight and walked cautiously outside, my feet crunching in the gravel driveway. The night air was thick with salt, the ocean breeze carrying the scent of brine. As I stepped onto the beach, I could hear the footsteps clearer now. But when I shone the flashlight toward the sound, there was nothing. No one. Just the endless stretch of sand, bathed in moonlight. I stood there for a long moment, scanning the beach. Maybe it was just the wind playing tricks on me, or a shadow cast by a rock, I thought. But as I turned to head back to the house, I heard it again. The footsteps. Closer now. The flashlight beam shaking in my hand. There was no one in sight. The only movement came from the waves gently lapping at the shore. The next night, the footsteps came again. And the night after that? Each time, I would step outside to find nothing but an empty beach, the sand untouched, except for the occasional tide marks. By the fourth night, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know what was happening, who or what was out there. So I waited. I waited in silence, sitting in the darkened living room, watching the clock tick closer to midnight. When the first step echoed through the night, I grabbed my flashlight and rushed outside, heart pounding in my chest. The air was heavier tonight, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. The footsteps started, slow and deliberate, just as they always did. This time, I didn't hesitate. I moved toward the sound, each step I took crunching in the sand until I reached the water's edge. I paused, the light of the moon casting long shadows over the sea. And then I saw them. They were just figures, silhouettes against the waves, walking in perfect sync along the shoreline. The figures were translucent, barely visible, but I could see them clearly enough. Their forms were indistinct, their faces hollow, their movements slow but purposeful. The hair on my arms stood up as I stared, frozen in place. The figures were walking toward me, their footsteps echoing in the still night. But they were not alive. I knew that, deep in my gut. They were something else. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. The flashlight trembled in my grip, casting weak beams that flickered and danced across the figures. As they got closer, I could hear the faintest whispers carried by the wind. The words were indistinct, but the tone was clear and mournful. Sorrowful sound that seemed to come from all directions at once. And then, as quickly as it had started, they stopped. The footsteps ceased, the figures turned, walking into the water, their forms dissolving into the mist. I stood there, staring at the empty shore, my heart racing. I wanted to call out, to scream, but no sound escaped my throat. I ran back to the house, my pulse thudding in my ears. When I reached the door, I slammed it shut, locking it behind me. The house was silent, eerily still. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me inside. The next day, I went into town to talk to the locals, trying to find some explanation. The woman at the small shop gave me a strange look when I mentioned the footsteps, and after a long silence she spoke. "You heard them, didn't you?" "The midnight walkers," she said, her voice hushed. "They're the souls of those lost to the sea. They walk the shore at night looking for peace, but they never find it." I felt a chill run down my spine. But why? Why are they walking? She glanced around before leaning in close. "A long time ago there was a shipwreck. Hundreds of souls drowned that night. They say their spirits never left, that they still walk the beach every night, waiting for the sea to take them home." I left the store, my mind spinning. I had heard the stories before of restless spirits and lost souls, but never had I felt one so close. That night, the footsteps came again, and every night after that. Each time, I would hear them from the beach, slow and steady, a mournful march in the distance, would never go near the shore again. And every night I would sit in the silence, listening to the footsteps, knowing I wasn't alone. To this day, I don't know if they're still out there, walking the shore. But I know this: some things are never meant to be disturbed. Some things are meant to stay lost to the sea. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend getaway, just the two of us, a secluded beach house and the sound of the waves. But then, we found the boat. We hadn't expected it. The house, old as it was, seemed perfect rustic, with a view of the ocean that stretched forever. We were eager to spend time in the sun and relax, but that first evening changed everything. The boat was hidden away in the overgrown backyard, just beyond the rusted fence. At first, we thought it was a decoy or some forgotten relic of a previous tenant, but there was something about it, something unsettling. It was an old rowboat, half submerged in a patch of muddy ground, covered in a thick layer of moss. The edges were chipped, the wood weathered, but it wasn't the boat itself that caught my attention. It was the way it seemed to almost watch us. It was as though it had been waiting for us, waiting to be noticed. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up just standing near it. I didn't tell my partner, but I knew something was wrong. We had no reason to investigate it at first, but after a night of strange sounds in the house creaks in the walls, whispers of wind that felt like they were coming from inside the rooms, we both felt the need to find some explanation. Maybe the boat was tied to the eerie atmosphere that seemed to suffocate the house. "Let's check it out tomorrow," my partner said as we lay in bed that night. I heard the doubt in their voice. I felt it too, the tension that had started to seep into the air, thick as fog. The next morning, we made our way out to the backyard. The sky was a perfect shade of blue, the air thick with salt from the sea, but something was off. The boat looked even older in daylight, its edges more warped, the peeling paint stark against the sun. We approached it slowly, like we were trespassing on something that didn't belong to us. As we neared it, the odd feeling in my gut intensified. I could see my partner looking down at it, frowning. "There's something in there," they said. I looked closer. The boat was filled with dirty water, but there, lying just beneath the surface, was an old, crumpled sheet of paper. My first thought was that it had been thrown in by whoever had left the boat here. But the longer I stared at it, the more it seemed out of place, like it didn't belong. The paper was yellowed and torn, its edges curling. "I'm going to pull it out," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I reached down into the water, my fingers brushing against something cold and slimy. The moment I touched the paper, I felt a shiver run through me, like I had just disturbed something that had been waiting. With a quick tug, I pulled the paper out of the boat. The moment it was free, the atmosphere shifted. A gust of wind whipped around us, and I could hear my partner's breath catch in their throat. I unfolded the paper, revealing the faded writing. It was barely legible, but one phrase stood out to me. "They're still watching." Before I could read more, a sharp sound broke through the silence. A low, scraping noise came from the boat, like the hull shifting, creaking under some invisible pressure. I froze, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck prickling again, this time with a far more urgent fear. My partner stepped back, their face pale, eyes wide. "What was that?" they asked, their voice trembling. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was too busy staring at the boat, which seemed to sway slightly, as if something or someone was inside it. "Let's go back inside," my partner said, their voice barely audible. I didn't argue. I turned to leave. But as I glanced back one last time, I swear I saw something in the boat, a figure, faint, almost imperceptible. But there was something watching us, something old and waiting. Later, after we went back into the house and locked the door behind us, I couldn't shake the feeling that the boat was still there, still watching us through the window. The wind howled louder that night, and as we lay in bed, I could hear a faint rustling noise coming from outside, the sound of something shifting in the yard. It sounded like the boat, like something was moving in it, even though no one was there. That night the whispers returned, louder than before, and they were coming from the house, no longer just in the walls. No longer just the wind. These whispers were coming from the backyard, right next to the boat. I got up and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside, expecting to see nothing, but there it was. The boat was gone. The backyard was empty. The boat had vanished without a trace, leaving only the rustling leaves and a feeling of suffocating dread in its place. We left the next morning, driving away from the beach house with no plans to return. We never spoke about it again, but we both knew what we had felt, what we had seen, what we hadn't seen. And we both knew, deep down, that whatever had been in that boat, whatever had been watching us, was still there, in the backyard, waiting for the next pair of unsuspecting travelers. I don't know who disappeared from that boat, or why they were watching. All I know is that sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can hear that scraping noise again. And I wonder if anyone else will find that boat.